Hey, this is Christian Roldan.
And Jordan Morris from the Seattle Sounders Football Club.
And you're listening to
This is Nos Odietis.
This episode of Nos Odietis is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Odietis since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
A sideline fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rodriguez through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicola Dero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is going good!
They've scored! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
Is that what you young people call twerking?
And Porteous says, cheated!
You want to win? This is the Seattle Sounders, bro.
Welcome to another episode of Nos Odietis, sponsored by Full Pull Wines and our subscribers. We're recording on Thursday, May 30th, 2024. I am your host, Jeremiah Shan. Joining me today is my co-host, Aaron Campo, and our engineer, Lickett. Well, for a few glorious moments, it felt like the Sounders had scored a hard-fought win over the top team in the Western Conference. The seeming clincher came deep into stoppage time when Reed Baker-Whiting intercepted a pass, drove forward, shrugged off the defender like it was absolutely nothing, and then calmly delivered a perfect pinpoint pass to Danny Musovski, who hit a sliding shot into the net. Musovski, who had a terrible misses in the last couple weeks, looked particularly relieved. Baker-Whiting, who had been working himself back from a 6-month injury absence, let out a roar that had to be particularly cathartic, except it didn't happen. Well, at least not officially. VAR flagged Musovski's challenge that started the sequence for review, and the referee ultimately decided to wave off the goal. Less than a minute after the ball was back in play, RSL had an equalizer when the Sounders failed 3 separate opportunities to clear the danger. Instead of a potential season-defining win, the Sounders were instead stuck with more frustrating dropped points. In a season of depressing results, this feels an awful lot like a low point. That's 6 points they've now dropped at home on late goals, leaving them with an abysmal 1-1-5 record at home. Aaron, you were in the stands for this one. How would you describe your feeling?
You said that it could have been a season-defining win, and I actually think it ended up being season-defining in its own way.
It could be.
Yeah, it just felt like so much of the same at the end of the game, in a game that hadn't really felt that way to me up to that point. You know, it was such a kick to the gut, because that swing from, oh my God, they actually managed to kill off a game, not just hang on to the win, but kill off a game.
Yes.
To, oh, it's the same old shit. Was just such an unpleasant swing. And I didn't think they played poorly for most of the game at all. RSL, I said earlier this year that I was very skeptical of RSL. And I, I'll eat crow. They've consistently been a pretty good team. And I thought the Sounders did really well up until the first goal. And then from that point on, it was just like they forgot how to play soccer. And it's just, I'm always so skeptical of confidence playing this big of a role in professional sports, because I feel like professional athletes just have so much confidence that, because you have to get to this level, that it just can't really be a factor. But I can't think of anything else. I really can't think of anything else that would explain a team that has the talent and the ability to have all of this possession, right, that ultimately doesn't really go anywhere. But it's like, in a game like this, that's all you need to do. You've got a lead, you're at home, your opponents are tired, they've been chasing the game. All you got to do is hang on the ball. They get a lead and they suddenly can't do that. It just feels so much like they're playing scared so much of the time, especially when they've got a lead.
Well, I will say one thing that was definitely working in RSL's favor was that they rotated their lineup a lot more than the Sounders had. So they had a bunch of starters that were waiting to come on. And I haven't gone back and really done a hard analysis on this, but it feels like a lot of those starters were coming on around the same time that Rusnak scored. And so they were, and the other thing was that they got I didn't realize this in real time, but they got a 6th sub because of a concussion replacement, and they actually were able to do it over 4 windows, which, you know, is totally within the rules, but it does sort of like they were able to get more fresh. My point is they were able to get even more fresh legs on the field. And the Sounders don't have nearly the same depth right now. You know, they did bring in Josh Atencio, Reed Baker Whiting, I think, is solid sub. But then you also were bringing in, you know, Paul Rothrock, and then who was the other sub?
Gosh, can't even remember. Was it Baker?
Oh, Danny Musovski.
Oh, right.
And you know, like those aren't. I don't think those are bad players, but they aren't. You know, most of those players are not players you were expecting to start, right?
Yeah,
and. I mean, I do think that the subs the Sounders made were fine. Like I saw a lot of people questioning bringing on Christian. I actually thought Reed played well in his place. I think it's, you know, Jordan coming off for Josh Atencio. You know, maybe that was a little defensive, but theoretically the kind of player you want. Like I think Josh Atencio is like a perfect kind of player to help see out a game. Yeah, you know, Paul Rothrock. For who he would have come in for, João Paulo. No, I guess no. Paul Rothrock was for João Paulo, and Danny Musovski for Raul Rui Diaz. I think that made sense. If anything, I actually wouldn't have mind seeing Rui Diaz come out a little earlier. Yeah, you know, this was a frustrating game, at least for me, for Rui Diaz, and there was one play that really stood out to me. Reed Baker Whiting was on a break around the 74th, 75th minute. And Raul is up against 2 center backs and he just stops his run. And it's like he was expecting it looked like maybe he was expecting a slightly earlier ball, but like just continue the run. What are you doing? It looked like he just was out of legs.
Yeah, and it's not shocking that he's out of legs, right? Because he's playing so many minutes. And it's interesting because I actually thought that Brian's comments in the post game, where he said, you know, the subs were the subs because we needed legs. We needed, and I think that that's true. I mean, it was pretty clear that a lot of players were totally gassed. And yeah, I mean, you'd rather be the team bringing on your starters to see out that game, but you've got to bring somebody on. Because it wasn't working with the guys that were in there. And I didn't think, I mean, would I rather have a fit and fresh João Paulo than Paul Rothrock? Yeah, of course I would. But that's not
he came out in the 92nd minute. Yeah. He needed to, like, he looked like he was spent.
Yes. And, you know, that's not a good situation, obviously, to be in. But it's like, it's not that I don't think that there are lots of criticisms that can be made of Brian, but at certain points in the year, it's been, he never wants to make subs. He's not making subs early enough. Right. He's not doing anything soon enough. And now it's like, how is he making all these changes and bringing on these guys? It's like, you gotta pick one, man. You have to expect professionals to be able to see out that game more effectively than they did. And you know,
frankly, the players who I think really didn't cover themselves in glory were some of the players that you would expect. You know, like Nuhu all of a sudden really wasn't. You know, he kind of got invisible after the goal. Like he was like the defenders that you are kind of relying on to sort of start the possession were not. Like they were effectively just booting it out every single time they had an opportunity, which, you know, is not the craziest plan to do, but it's tough to do that for 20 minutes even when you're at home.
Yeah.
And that was sort of a point that Rusnak made in the post game, which was like, look, if you need to hold on for 5 minutes, that's soccer. Like you just got to kind of do that. But if you're going to try to just hold on for 20, 30 minutes, whether you're home or away, you're sort of inviting trouble.
Yeah.
And it really, that was the situation here. You know, like I put together a bunch of stats on this. One of the ones that really struck me was that through the first, from the where the Sounders really dominated this game was the beginning of the second half until the goal. So during those 25 minutes, the Sounders did not allow RSL to have a single touch in their offensive third.
Yeah.
There was just basically a wall about 40 yards from goal that kept RSL from getting anywhere near goal. The Sounders had a 7-0 shots advantage during that stretch. They were outpassed. They had about 58% of the possession. They were dominant. And, they were putting RSL under a lot of pressure. Even the free kick that Rusnak scores, that comes from a foul that was born out of the Sounders pushing the RSL defense. The RSL defense was scrambling during that entire first 25 minutes. It was really encouraging play, I thought.
Yeah.
And then after Rusnak scored, just like all of a sudden a switch goes off. The Sounders end up getting outshot from that point forward 10-2. They are outpassed basically 4-1, which was like 200 to 60 something or whatever over the last 20 minutes.
Right.
And then in the last 10 or from the 85th minute on, RSL took 8 shots and almost all of its XG was piled into that like last 10-15 minutes of gameplay. Just a complete capitulation in terms of like allowing the game to be dictated.
Yeah, and it's just, if this were a young team, if this were a team that had never had success, if this were a team playing on the road against, against RSL, it wouldn't be excusable. I think it would still be a really frustrating performance, but it would be a little more understandable. But, it's like you said, like the players I think that were really letting the team down post goal were not the younger guys. They were guys like Nuhu, as you said, and
or Yamar or Jackson or Alex rolled on.
Yeah, these are guys that have to be expected to step up, right? Like, because a lot of them, if they can't do that, then I don't know exactly what it is they're bringing, right? Like,
right.
And they know how to pass, they know how to possess. It's maybe the only thing they know how to do, and at least repeatably. And, it's just frustrating because when you've got a team on the ropes, now, obviously you don't want to go crazy and leave yourself open, right? When you've got a lead, you don't want to have the cliche of getting a goal and then immediately allowing one, right? So I get that, but just to completely take your foot off the gas to the extent that they did. And, it's just they seem like a team that does not have any faith in themselves to get more than a goal a game at home. And so
they've done it once.
Yeah. And so they go into these situations where they're like, okay, that's our goal. We've got half an hour to see this out.
Right.
Like that almost feels like it's the mindset. And it's why, if you're, a vibes guy, which I guess I increasingly kind of am, it's why the shift from Musovski getting the goal, the team closing out a game, killing off a game, just all of the positive energy that brings to having that wiped out and then having it be the same old story, a late goal at home in a game that you should win. I just don't know how many more of these things their psyches collectively can take.
Yeah.
Like
right. That's
How often can this happen to you without you just beginning to believe that that's just who you are fundamentally as a team?
Yeah. And I will, one other thing I just wanted to put a bow on sort of the sub situation. I thought Reed was like one of the only guys that was actually pushing play.
Yeah, he was fantastic.
And he did it a few times.
Yeah.
I really was encouraged by him. I thought, like I said, even though that play didn't count, it did happen.
Right.
And I thought he looked really good on it, and it was encouraging to see. And I hope he can at least build on that, because I think he's a player who can potentially sort of change the trajectory of the season. If he can get get more involved. You know, he's a player who brings something to the table that the Sounders don't really have, which is, you know, a defensive player who can potentially affect the attack as well.
Yeah.
And and there were some encouraging performances this one. I actually really liked Obed Vargas again. I think he's, you know, this is, I think, his second straight game, or no, I guess he started last game at right mid, but he's got a series of strong performances now that he's been able to stack on one another.
Yeah.
I am really happy with his progression over the last, you know, during this stretch of games that really started with the Philadelphia Union game where he sort of broke out. And he's, you know, he was 35 for 41 passing. He was 2 for 2 on dribbles, 8 for 16 on duels. He almost scored. He had a great strike that forced Gavin Beavers into, you know, one of Beavers. It should be said, this is a 19-year-old goalkeeper for RSL. He looked really good in the first meeting against the Sounders. He had a shutout. He looked really good in this one too. I was actually,
he had a good game.
Most of the Sounders' chances came on relatively long distance shots, but they had a couple good looks that he handled really well. You know, the one he didn't handle was Rusnak's free kick, which, you know, that was another positive. I thought Rusnak's free kick was spectacular. I love the way that he basically he was basically giving all the signal that he was getting ready to cross it. You know, he was pointing at guys. He you know, when he's right before he puts his head down to strike the ball, he's like looking to make a pass, and then he just bends it around the wall and inside the near post. Just thought that was a great, and he clearly was very very happy with himself. It was his first goal of the season.
Two good games in a row for him as well, which is just nice to see.
Those are good things, but they are absolutely overshadowed by the general inability of this team to close out games, and they've gotten away with it a few times too. And after the game, Rusnak actually pointed this out, that it's like, you can look at that Philadelphia game where they were up 3-0 at halftime, and then they spend the entire second half just like holding on for dear life, essentially. You know, you look at the St. Louis game, this last game, they go up 2-0, and again they sort of stop playing, and you know, those are two, I think, a little bit more excusable because those are on the road. But again, like, they just went from looking really good through, you know, taking the lead, and then they stop looking really good almost as soon as they give up the lead. And I don't know. It's got to be both Rusnak and Schmetzer called it a mentality issue where guys have to sort of just want the ball, and they need to be willing to connect the passes, and they need to be showing to passes. And it's, you know, it's a multi-part thing, and it is sort of like, you just got to get out of that siege mentality, and you got to play like you're still trying to win the game, not just sort of protect it.
Right.
And I don't know that there's an easy answer for that, because it does feel like the more it happens like this, the more it's going to happen.
Yeah, because I do think it's clearly a mentality thing. You know, I think you're totally right. I think the players that have called it out are totally right, that it's clearly something wrong psychologically. And those patterns are hard to break out of. I mean, they're hard to break out of in regular life, right? For normal people. Yeah. I can't imagine, with the pressure that professional athletes have, how much harder it could potentially be to break out of those kind of mentality, you know, that kind of mentality. And I almost wonder if, like, they need another game that they just win quite comfortably to sort of hit the reset. But the problem is that you have to score goals to do that. And they're just not doing that. You know, one of my pet conspiracy theories this year has been, it's all the turf's fault, right? The turf is so slow. And I was excited, you know, the rain was not fun to be in, but I was like, well, hey, the turf's wet, you know, at least maybe we'll get another 5-goal game.
I did think the ball moved better yesterday.
It did. I mean, there was clearly a difference, but at the end of the day, they still only put the ball in the net once. Yeah,
and it was on a set piece.
I guess they did actually put the ball in the net twice, but they only, one of them counted. So I don't know. And even, you know, it's like you said, they had a game where they were up big on the road against Philly, and it ended up being a lot closer than it should have been. And really same against St. Louis. So Even the positives.
Yeah, even you can even look at the Louisville game where they won in penalties, but they were up 2-0 in that game.
Yeah.
And they didn't put it away. Or they could have won the Phoenix game more easily than they did, and they didn't put that one away. So it's like it is, I will say that if there's one thing I've started to believe about this team is that they are more comfortable grinding out games than they are sort of opening up. Yeah. And in that way, I suppose they are maybe well suited to like go for it in the Open Cup. And at this point, that is really, I would hope that the organization, that the play, that everyone is sort of looking at the Open Cup. This is our chance to have who knows what's going to happen from here on out, but the Open Cup is here. We know this is an opportunity, and hopefully that's the way they look at it. It feels much more attainable than anything else in MLS right now, which to me is really dependent on whether or not they're going to ever get Pedro de la Vega to get right. And I mean, I came into this week somewhat optimistic that they were being straight with us about his injury situation. I don't know. I don't know if he's going to play against Sporting Kansas City. He obviously didn't play against RSL. And I did talk to some people in the organization, and it sounds like the issue is not that he is really badly hurt. It's that he can't get through. They need him to be training at a higher level than he's training at. And like, I guess he's saying like, hey, I just want to play. And they're like, no. We need you to be training. We need you really training at a high level so that we can rely on you to stay healthy. Right. And so it's like sort of this ramping up process. And it's like every time they ramp him up, he feels some discomfort. And so they bring him back down. And so it's like this incremental situation where they keep trying to ramp him up, and hopefully they figure it out and get him right, because he is a lot of fun to watch. And I'm starting to think that it's like him and Reed are the two players that are potential variables that can maybe change the trajectory of this team. But right now, they are just not a good offensive team. They are just I mean, they're averaging, they've got 14 open or non-penalty goals in 16 games. It's dire. They are not scoring goals with any regularity.
Yeah, I think that since the opening 5 games, since that stretch, the team has been sort of the downside version of the team we kind of expected coming into the year, right? Which was a playoff team that has a good enough defense to grind out results and enough of an offense that they can score enough to win a few games and very infrequently get just blown out of games. They're playing like a decent-ish, or getting results like a decent-ish middle of the pack playoff team since those first 5 games.
They're basically playing at like a 1.5 pace since those first 5 games.
Yeah. And that's not good. That's not what anybody expects. But I think, when we talked about this team and what we expected of them coming into the year, that was what we sort of identified as like, this is very possible that they could be like this, right? And that they just don't have enough firepower. And I think that opening 5 games, as it reasonably should have, made everything that came after it feel worse. But they could play this way that they've been playing the rest of the season and probably get into the playoffs. And if they get into the playoffs, I think they're actually set up pretty well for the playoffs, right? Just the way the team is built. Yeah. But they have some really, really glaring weaknesses that are just so frustrating, because they don't seem like, I get that they're not going to be an offensive juggernaut with this team, but all the stuff we've been talking about in this episode about their inability to close out games, there's no reasonable explanation for that in my mind. That is the roster, right? And I do wonder, I was kind of thinking about this earlier today, if having a striker like Raul as your main outlet when you're in the kind of situations they've been in, and his just inability to do a whole lot past the 45th minute is potentially part of that. It's not like Musovski has been great as an outlet and keeping possession, but
Raul does not do anything to help keep possession.
He doesn't.
That's honestly my biggest gripe with him is not that he isn't a, whatever. Like, I was talking to someone yesterday and they're like, look, if he can give you a goal from nothing, you got that's what you got to take right now. And, he's going to end up with, someone told me they thought he'd end up with like 15 to 18 goals. I'm just like, where are you getting that number? No. Like, you think he's going to score 10 more penalties? What? Like, I don't understand. Like, he might score 5 more open play goals this year. I think that's a high end. To me, that's the high end expectation. And, that would put him on 12 goals. If he'll grab a penalty or two, I suppose. But like, this is not a guy, like, whatever, you can live with that scoring output, I suppose. But what you can't live with is that he doesn't do anything else. He doesn't help you possess the ball. He doesn't help you in transition. He's just so he is a one trick pony at this point, and that one trick is a cool trick,
right?
But
right,
it's not going to win you game. I mean, you need it. It's like he's just too much of a non-factor in possession.
If he was having the kind of no scoring season that Nelson Valdez had,
right,
I think it would be infinitely better. I think if he had fewer goals but was doing everything else as well as Valdez
he was
did,
like he was pressing and he was holding up, and
I think that the team would have scored more goals overall. I really do. I think he's cost the team goals just with his inability to really do anything else. And it's painful to say that. I love Raul, but I understand that the fixture congestion, the injury situation, you've got a limited number of bodies. He's going to get more minutes than anybody wants, but I'm going to be upset if he starts against Sporting KC.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, to me, the one area that I'm willing to be a little bit more lenient about is there aren't great options right now, I suppose, like, because unless you really think Danny Musovski would be a better starter, I'm not sure moving like Jordan to the 9 makes a lot of sense if you're just talking about bringing in Dylan Tevez, Paul Rothrock, who also would be potential. I guess those are the 2 main options, right? At this point,
I think I would probably rather see Tevez at this point, honestly, than Raul. But
yeah, I don't know if I would quite go that far. But I mean, I'm sympathetic to the idea that it could be. I wouldn't mind seeing that option. I just feel like if you're gonna start Raul, you got to get him out at around 60 or 70. Yeah. You just can't let him go 80, 90 minutes every game the way that he's going right now. I would say that's my biggest complaint, is just the way that he's not just starting, it's that he's staying in games way longer than it seems like he should be. And I guess that's one area I would criticize Brian over in this game.
Yeah.
Bring in Musovski earlier.
Yeah. It's every game. And I do, like, at this point,
move Jordan up to the 9, bring Atencio in, right? That kind of thing.
I do wonder too if Musovski is a better option right now. Like, he obviously hasn't set the world on fire.
He might,
but I'd like to see it. I would just like to see it, because we kind of know what we're getting from Raul at this point.
Yeah,
and I don't know what it hurts to give him 1 game off to see how it looks.
Right. I also, it's tough when you're seeing Raul start 2 games in a week the way that he, or 3, well, like 2. I guess it was 2 games this week. Yeah, or was it 3? No, it was 2. It was just 2. Saturday and Wednesday. Yeah. But and I think it's great. Like, Raul, to his credit, got himself fit this year. I think he may have already played more minutes than he did last year, which, hey, I'm thrilled. Good for him. Yeah. Like, that's great. Like, and I think on some level, if you want to reward that work, he's doing what you ask him to do, especially when you're down like this. That's fine, but you don't need to play him 80 minutes.
Yeah.
You don't have to play him 80 minutes. But this all leads to, and I think we probably need to talk about this. And you were in the stands, so maybe you have a better sense of this. I was, the announced attendance was like 29,000 and change.
Yeah.
That's the lowest announced attendance since June 17th, 2009, at least non-COVID impacted attendance. That was before the Sounders expanded seating in the expansion year. So there was a bunch of games before that were low, but that was because that's what capacity was for those games.
Right.
And then if you look out there, I had a lot of people really worked up about that's not how many people were in the stands. There was way less people. Like there probably were less people in the stands, but no one's counting people in the stands. That's just not how this works.
Yeah.
Regardless, did it feel particularly empty to you in the stands?
It felt like a 2011 CCL group stage game in the stands.
Oof. Okay.
It probably wasn't that bad, right?
No, I don't think it was that bad, but that's pretty. That's telling.
It felt a lot closer to that than even a weeknight rainy MLS midseason game in
Well, I mean, rainy midseason games. We've seen thin crowds relative to what our expectations are, but this did feel like a low point, and it was, I think, to be fair, it was a sort of perfect storm. Kind of crappy weather, a midweek game, a Mariners game across the street.
Yeah.
There you can come up with it was a perfect storm of bad
for sure
factors. But I do think what it illustrates is that the floor of Sounders attendance used to be 30,000 and change, 32,000, going up and it's been, at one point the floor was like 39,000, and that's just like what you would expect every game, no matter what happened. And we are just not there anymore. It might, I suppose the floor might be lower than it was yesterday.
Oh, I think it is for sure. I mean, and it's one of those things where it's like 29,000 people for an MLS game is still a big crowd, right? Mm-hmm. Relative to everybody else. Mm-hmm. But when you know how good the crowds can be, and they fill the stadium when there's a reason to get people out there. But just we've talked about this, but the game, the game day experience is just not what it used to be.
No, I mean, especially when people are going out there, they have one win in 7 home games. They've scored multiple goals in one win. It's not a fun time out at the park now.
It's not. It's really not. And it's just the vibes are just bad in the stadium. People aren't angry, even, at least at this game that I experienced. Like, there was frustration for sure, but it's just like people are just like, well, yeah, of course that happened, and that's not a good place to be. That is really not a good place to be.
And I don't know I don't know. This is a more complicated question, I think, than maybe even the scoring problems, because it's not like this all happened overnight. This has been a slow trickle. It's picked up pace since COVID. The Sounders have never really recovered from the COVID, the Sounders attendance numbers at least have never really recovered, but the game day experience hasn't really recovered. There just used to be more to the pregame. Just to use an example, I don't walk the concourse that much. My impression that I hear from people is that they're just, there's more closed stands than there used to be.
There definitely are.
It's just not a premium experience the way that it once was. And what's frustrating is, I have this interview with Adrian Hanauer that's going to come out next week, probably. And if you're in our Discord, I'll probably clip some highlights and share those early. But, his heart is absolutely in the right place. This is a guy who cares deeply about the team. But I didn't get the sense that they are they're as focused on the current struggles as the average fan is. Like, I think they sort of are taking this bigger picture view of, trying to extrapolate out to where they're trying to go, but they aren't necessarily as, I asked them about the season ticket package that got shipped in, nondescript bags and was a pretty bad experience. I asked him about, the way the annual business meeting was handled last year, where if you remember, it was effectively held in private, unless you like really were paying attention. And you kind of go down this laundry list of things that have frustrated fans, and he's sort of like, well, these are one-off, they're each isolated, and he didn't really agree with the idea that it's part of a trend. And I guess that's his right to disagree with me on. But I think you look at a crowd like yesterday, and it's hard not to see, like wonder what's going on here,
Yeah.
And sure, the results aren't helping, but it's not all results. There's a witch's brew of things that are conspiring to leave us where we are, and it's not all lost. It's not, the Sounders aren't doomed to irrelevance. Any day, at some point, they can turn back the spigot, I suppose, and presumably inject some energy back into this. But it's about that time,
Yeah.
Like if you're waiting to turn back on the spigot, it's good. Like maybe do that.
Yeah. It feels like trying to reconnect to, you're never going to be able to recapture the energy of 2009, right? You can't do that.
Sure. You got to do something different.
And
that's what the 50th anniversary, though, I felt like had the potential to be.
Absolutely. That's
and
where I was going.
Been.
And yeah, it feels like a total afterthought. They had a rebrand. They had all this like cool merch, new secondary and tertiary marks. Like, yeah, they did a great job with that. And I got really, really energized for the season in a way that I hadn't felt in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've always been excited, but it was like, it just really felt like, okay, this is like back to being the thing. And it's just, and I know that the conditions are more unfavorable. The economy is not great, especially in this area. It's not like the economy was great in 2009 either. There was some stuff that had recently happened that caused some problems. So I don't think that's a great excuse. It's gotten more expensive. The team has been not bad for an extended period of time, but
boring.
It doesn't feel special. The game day experience doesn't feel special anymore the way that it used to. And I think it's like you said, it's like they have to find a way to recapture some of that energy. And I don't foresee them abandoning some of their ticketing policies and that sort of stuff. And I really feel like that's kind of when things started going downhill. Like that's when 2016 is really when that
pretty clear correlation.
Yeah. But they have more fans that are turning up to games.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see evidence of that in a lot of places, and maybe, it's possible that I suppose that the Sounders are sort of like just becoming part of the sports landscape. They are, we see this with the Mariners, where when they are struggling, it's, T-Mobile Park is pretty empty.
Yeah.
But then as soon as they go on a winning streak, it's like, oh, it's the hottest ticket in town.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's possible that the Sounders have never really tapped into that sort of market because it's so heavily season ticket holders that there's not a lot of game day sales or single game sales that are going on. And I don't know, maybe that's the direction maybe that's what the direction they want to move in. I don't know. I doubt that's what they want to do because it just, I would think
make less money that way.
You would think seemingly make less money, but it's, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how this goes because this season could have had the potential to be really special, and it has not. I mean, it has not been special. It's been mostly a disappointment, and you can point to any number of factors, and some of them are in the front office's control, and some of them aren't, and some of them are in the players' control, and some of them aren't. But they are, a lot of missed opportunities. Across the board.
Yeah, big time. And I think that if you're Adrian and you're running the ship, running the whole show, and you have the knowledge of the business well enough to see how these issues are maybe not directly connected and not indicative of an overall problem, that's great. But you have to be aware of how it feels to the fans.
Yeah, right.
And there are just a lot of disconnects that kind of feel like that, where it just doesn't feel like ownership. And Adrian is sort of I guess, for lack of a better term, the avatar for ownership generally.
I mean,
right?
I do think he's the one in charge.
Yeah, right. And it just it feels like there is not enough urgency. And I'm not talking about, specific roster moves that they haven't made or don't appear to be willing to make at this time.
Right.
I just mean generally it doesn't feel like they have enough urgency to understand how bad things are.
Yeah, and one of the other criticisms I've heard, and I'm increasingly sympathetic to, is, one of the things that Garth did while he was here was he was doing a weekly radio show, and I'd never really found that to be super informative, and I certainly didn't talk to him every week, but he did do semi-regular press availabilities, and I don't know, I guess if you just look at the broad press availabilities, Craig might be equally as available, but he's certainly not doing the weekly stuff. And so there is an impression that he's sort of ducking accountability for what, and I don't even know if how much of this I put on him, but if he was out there being, upfront about what they're trying to do, that I think would be helpful. My hope is that we hear from him soon. We haven't heard from him since the Arriaga trade, which I guess wasn't that long ago, but a lot has seemingly changed since then.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I just think there could be more out front kind of availability, a little bit more visibility into what they're doing, what they're trying to do. It's going to be, we've got, we're halfway through the season basically right now. And there's just a lot, there's a lot to be left to desire. Yeah. I don't know. Oh, you're still, can you hear me? Oh, you're ready to join. Never mind. Okay, go ahead.
Hey, sorry about that. I think that it's easy to forget that in 2016 and especially in 2018, it's not like there weren't an insignificant number of people calling for Garth's job, right? Like there was a lot of anger about the fact that we hadn't signed a striker, about the way 2016 had gone, because 2016 was like really the first time it had been fully Garth's team.
Mm-hmm.
And people said, oh, and this is the worst team we've ever had. This guy's totally ruined everything. And then 2018, it was like a lot of the same criticisms we're hearing now. And Garth was a lot more willing to get out in front of it and talk to the public. And people weren't always happy with his answers and the things that he said. But he was talking. And, I think Garth likes to talk. I think he's a guy who likes that part of the job, and maybe Craig's not as much that way. I don't know, and Garth also had a bigger role, right? He wasn't just the general manager, but that's the level on which people sort of viewed him, right? Like Craig is not, from an org chart perspective, Garth's replacement, but from a public perception perspective, he absolutely is. And it would be nice to hear what he has to say about some of this stuff. You're right.
I hope, my hope is that we will get some of that soon. And we're, like, I don't know, it feels funny to be talking about this as coming off of a tie. But I do think the home struggles are really at the core of everything that's causing this frustration. And, we've now had 3 straight seasons of pre-mediocre home results, and Lumen Field's supposed to be this, it's never been a huge home field advantage, but it definitely was a significant, they were always a good home team. They've always been a good home team, and they just, something is not right now. And
on the road, the Sounders have been, not great, but
they're getting results.
Their road record is
figuring
not
out how to win games.
3-5-1 is, you'd like a few of those 5 to switch over to the 1 column, but it's not terrible, you know. If they could just be average at home, they would be in pretty good shape, I think. But it's just,
yeah. I mean, if they just if they had those 6 points that they dropped in the ties on late goals, they'd be 5th in the table right now.
Yeah,
they'd be in perfectly fine shape.
Yep. It's beyond frustrating. It's beyond frustrating, and the injuries are a problem. Obviously, it's made things a lot harder than they needed to be, but it can't be an excuse because they're in these games and they're pissing them away.
Yeah. Yep. Well, that's probably a good place to end the show today. I think we're going to come back next. We have a bye this weekend. We're going to come back and do a mailbag episode next week. I think that's the plan.
Yep.
We will have the Adrian Hanauer interview early next week as well. So that's something you can look forward to. But all that said, I am Jeremiah O'Shan, signing off for, I guess, our sponsor as well, Full Pull Wines. Signing off for Aaron Campo and Lickett. This is Nos Adietis. Remember, you'll never get alone.
We love you. Let's win another one.